Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here tonight and joining us. My name is Bonnie Blair Lacey, and I'm the Jean Jones Education and Public Programs Manager here at the museum. I'm so pleased to welcome tonight's speaker, Dr. Beth Ledger, who hails from the University of Nevada, Reno's Department of Biology and is the director of the Museum of Natural History on campus. She's also the director of the Ledger Lab, which studies how native plants cope with the pressures of climate and anthropogenic change. Together with a group of researchers from UNR and beyond, Ledger Lab works with the goal of improving restoration in the vast and beautiful Great Basin, while also training the workforce that is directing science on the ground. Tonight's talk is connected with the exhibition upstairs, Deep Time Sea Dragons of Nevada, and celebrates the vibrant life forms that have called the Great Basin home, from mighty ichthyosaurs to highly adapted plant life today. Sea Dragons is on the third floor of the museum and is open tonight until 8 p.m. if you want to stop and see it after the talk. And it's on view until January 11th of the new year. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Ledger.
Yay, thank you so much, Bonnie, and thank you all for being here on this rainy evening. I know you all have other places you could be, and I appreciate you spending your time here. Can you hear me? I can get right up in there. Well, thank you all for being here. I am super excited to talk to you about my adopted home. I'm not from Nevada. I was born in California, but I've lived here since 2006, and I've come to really love the desert, and particularly the desert plants. And so tonight I'm going to be doing some things for you. I will be doing some shameless propaganda about Nevada's deserts and desert plants. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how the Great Basin is changing and what we're doing about it, what we're trying to do about it. I'm going to tell you a bunch of science stories. 3 stories about why small is the new big, which I will explain what that means. I'm going to tell you one story about trusting plants to do what they do best. And then at the very end, if you are inspired to learn more about Nevada's desert plants, I have a couple ways for you to do that. So let's back up to this second bullet point. Trusting plants to know what they need. The reality is the Great Basin is amazing, and the plants that live here have been here for a very, very long time. And their form and function has been shaped by natural selection for tens of thousands, if not millions of years. Sagebrush is the dominant shrub on this landscape, and it's the genus Artemisia, and that has been estimated to have been in North America for 13 to 23 million years, the genus of Artemisia. And so it has seen a lot of change. It has seen climate change, it has seen animal shifts. Humans only showed up about 14,000 years ago, so this plant has been dealing with a lot. It had to migrate as the climate changed, it had to evolve, it had to innovate. And all of the plants that live with sagebrush, which you can see in this beautiful photo, all of these plants have been playing this same game over time. And if they can't figure it out, they're gone, right? So every plant that you see outside is a winner. These have all figured out the tricks of the Great Basin. And historically, this sagebrush-dominated sites were very, very common across the 11 western states. That's what these green blobs are. So it's sagebrush and associated plants are shown here. Nevada, of course, has many of those kinds of habitats. We also have this lower elevation salt desert that's even drier than the sagebrush. This is where former Lake Lahontan was about 10,000 years ago. This is a former lake bed, right? And so these areas are quite dry and salty. There's also a bunch of little treetops in here. Many people know, the famous trees around here. Everybody loves Lake Tahoe. Everybody loves trees. And I'm here to tell you that trees are boring. They just don't change very fast, right? In a wet year, that is what this is going to look like. In a dry year, that is what this is going to look like. They do grow and change, but it's just so slow. Contrast that with the desert systems. When you add a little bit of water, like we're doing right now, these systems have the capacity to just absolutely explode. And from year to year, this could be a dry, field full of nothing. Or this was May 2023, if you remember that incredible year we had. This was just a few miles up the road. There's an amazing bloom of these wild onions that have been perennial under the ground waiting for this rain. And then these adorable annual lupins who all germinated from seeds that have been hanging out in the seed bank. And no, these aren't the majestic trees of Lake Tahoe. They're maybe pushing ankle high, right? But when we get these kinds of rains, this is like catnip for botanists, right? This is my friend Shannon, like literally just losing her mind out here with these blooms that are happening. And you do have to get down, you do have to bend down. These are not in your face. You do have to literally interact with these plants. But when you do, you're rewarded with these incredible forms. This is not even an inch tall, this Lewisia, but it is glorious. Insects love it, and it was also having this amazing year. So the sagebrush can be spectacular in the rain. And those lower elevation salt deserts, the places I was telling you that were the former lake beds, those can be even more spectacular, and they can change even more. And that was something that I've learned slowly over time by living here. So these are actually my new favorite places to work. I've been starting to work with these plants in the driest of the dry. This is a picture of the Fernley Wildlife Management Area. It's off Highway 80 on exit 50, if you feel compelled to go look at it. I should warn you, however, if you've seen the Google reviews of like Yosemite that say, it's just a bunch of rocks. Well, this site has been reviewed quite poorly on Google. This top person, I can't read them with my glasses, she says, there's absolutely nothing out here. Gangs of mosquitoes, a lone hare, and a single raven. No parking lot or building of any kind. Oh my God, right? I know. No real trails, just dirt. And scrub brush that's not really even big enough to be called a bush. Don't go here, dusty and boring. Not a hiking area, LOL. Google says it is. If you go, you will get stuck in clay mud, right? And I will say that all of this is kind of true, right? And then you personally have to decide if that is appealing or not appealing to you. It was not appealing to me when I first started going out there, but it has become appealing to me over the years. And myself and Jerry Team, who's the curator of the herbarium at the University of Nevada, Reno, and he's here, Jerry, right there. That is the best botanist for 500 miles. So if you have any plant questions, that is the man to ask them. Jerry and I have been co-teaching this class at UNR. We did it for 13 years, and we brought students around. We taught them the trees, of course, because we had to. And then we brought them down to the deserts, and we showed them the sagebrush plants, and then also tried to get them enthused about this, admittedly, very dry, very stark landscape. And so Jerry's standing out there with these students, and he's probably telling them that the place where we're standing was underwater 10,000 years ago. And you can see, when you're out there looking, you can see the lines of the former lake all around. And the cool thing is that all those plants have recolonized that area in the last 10,000 years. These soils are super dry, and they're very saline because of that evaporation that has been going on, just leaving minerals in the soil. So it's a super dry, super harsh environment. But there are some amazing shrubs that live there. There's a huge diversity of shrubs. Jerry, how many Tetrademia species are there in Nevada?
I think 8.
Yeah, there you go. And you can see about half of them out here at the Fernley Wildlife Area. So, they're not huge, but there is a ton of diversity. And you kind of have to get up close and look at these shrubs closely to tell one from the other. There are animals out there, and we do occasionally see animals. We saw this wonderful leopard lizard one time. We saw kit fox one time. But mostly what you see are the footprints of animals. And that's one of the cool things about this place that doesn't have a huge plant cover. There's all this dune habitat, and you can go see the footprints of beetles and snakes and lizards and birds that have walked through here, and I love that. The other cool thing about places that don't have a lot of plant cover is that they're really responsive to water. So when we do get a rain event, the soil can move a lot, and you can get these amazing changes. We were just out there a few weeks ago, and the rain had changed the place so much, we were actually disoriented in where we were standing because all of our landmarks had kind of shifted and changed. So these places change so much over time, and I'm telling you, those trees just don't do that. This is also home to the best shrub in the universe, which I'm just going to put that out there. This is the Nevada dahlia, and if you have another candidate, I'm willing to fight you about it, but this is my favorite shrub. This is Sorothamnus polydenius. It's a beautiful, again, about knee-high shrub. It's in the pea family, so it's related to lentils and snap peas and things, but it lives in this harsh environment. It has this particularly cool characteristic of these little orange dots on the stem, and they're full of this sort of resin that smells like smoky oranges, which is very cool. I feel like Nevada should have a craft cocktail that is made from this plant because it's a very complicated flavor. It also has really strong antimicrobial properties and has been used for antibiotics, and these adorable purple flowers. And so there's always a surprise when we go out there. Jerry and myself and my student Allison, we were just out there a few weeks ago. Jerry and I are passing the torch to her. We're actually tired of driving vans of people out to the desert, and so we're passing that torch to someone else. But we were out there and we saw a shrub out here, the iodine bush, that we had never seen out there in 13 years, and it was just because we took a slightly different path, right? So we're still discovering new plants out there that we didn't even know grew there. The last surprise from that site, this is something really only a mother could love. This is a Artemisia species that is the pokiest thing you've ever meet. And when we take our students out there, this is what it looks like. And we have to convince them that it's not dead, because it looks very dead. In the spring, when it gets rain, it will make these adorable little leaves that look kind of like broccoli and these beautiful little flowers. But for 13 years, we've gone out there and it's been dead, except for this year when we went out there, because it had been raining. This is really not a great photo because the iPhone doesn't believe that I want to take a picture of this, but there are little tiny green leaves in here, and this shrub is doing this fall blooming for the very first time in 13 years. And yes, you can't pull off the road and park your car and just like wander out there and understand that. It takes careful looking, and it takes what I've found to be looking over time to understand this change. So we have loved interpreting these places for people, and it has become one of my favorites. That's Jerry with confetti. Okay, so if you were paying attention earlier, you probably noted this first word, historic, right? So this is sort of the maximum of sagebrush extent that we know about, and this is the current sagebrush habitat. So maximum and current. We've lost a lot of this habitat. We've lost it to development. I covered up the name of this place so they don't sue me. We've lost it to things like this. We love, these short areas without trees are super easy to clear and put our stuff on top of. Another thing that has contributed to the loss of sagebrush has been an incredible abundance of grazing animals that was introduced at the turn of the century. They came in between these shrubs and grazed everything that was not sagebrush. So they took out the flowers, they took out the grasses, and left this hole. This hole was colonized very effectively by cheatgrass, which is an annual invasive plant that loves human beings. And it follows us wherever we go. And so what you're looking at here is, yes, sagebrush on top, but this understory no longer has that native component, and it's full of this really flammable plant. And so that is what happens when you have this sort of ignition potential. You get very hot fires. And when you get those fires over and over again, we take our beautiful, diverse shrublands and we turn them into stuff that looks like this. So the I-80 corridor in particular got hit very hard by grazing animals and fire, and you see a lot of this. I don't know why we don't put solar panels on top of this. Like, have at it, that's always somehow on this pristine land. There's plenty of land that looks like this, and I don't think anyone would mind a factory or a solar panel here, but anyway, soapbox. So this is happening. We're having a lot of fires. The thing is that we are not just watching this happen. Humanity is trying to reverse this course and trying to stop this transition. And the Great Basin is actually home to the largest ongoing native seed project in the entire world. Whether or not it is successful is a whole other story, but by God, we try. So this is a snapshot of the number of pounds of seed purchased by the Bureau of Land Management over a little 7-year snapshot and where they put them on the ground. So a lot of this sagebrush land is public land managed by the Bureau of Land Management. You can see that Nevada is the recipient of most of this seed. We get over 7 million pounds of seed in 7 years, followed by other Western states. So the goal of this is to try to prevent that conversion from perennial native plants to annual dominated systems. And looking at what we're putting in the ground, okay, we're putting 7 million pounds of something in the ground. What is it? This shows you sort of the relative abundance, not in pounds anymore, but the number of seeds in the ground that we're using. So we used to plant a lot of introduced plants like crested wheatgrass or forage kochia, alfalfa even. We used to do a lot of that. We don't do so much of that anymore. We still do a little bit. Mostly we're planting native grasses and shrubs, a little bit of native forbs. These are really hard to grow and they're pretty grumpy and they're really expensive. So that's one of the reasons why this bar is very low. But we do a lot of native grasses and native shrub seeding. This is almost entirely sagebrush and it's almost entirely wild collected. Sagebrush makes a bazillion seeds, so you can just walk up to it and harvest it in a couple weeks, it'll start being ready. So a lot of this is wild collected. These grasses, however, are not. There's no way you could collect, however many billion, 300 billion seeds of native grass. So these have to be farmed. They have to be wild collected and then brought to farms and then farmer increased to put out on the landscape. So these farmed seeds are not necessarily wild. They are cultivars or named varieties, a lot like what you would put in your garden if you went to Moana and bought, a cultivated variety. So they have been selected for particular characteristics, which I'll show you in a minute. And they get sent to farms. Many of them are in Utah and Colorado, grown up and then sold back to the Bureau of Land Management, who puts them on the ground in Nevada. So these red dots, or these red stars, are the original collection location for 8 workhorse species that we plant all the time. So every single one of these dots is something that you can buy if you live in Nevada for doing post-fire restoration. And do you see anything about this map that might bother you as someone from Nevada? Yeah, we have one plant, and it's from the wettest corner of Nevada, from Elko, right? And all of our plants are from this much cooler, much wetter part of the world, even up in Canada. We're taking plants that have, an average of 20, 25, 30 inches of rainfall a year, and we're bringing them down to Nevada where we get, 5, 6, 7 inches of rainfall a year. So I could have a whole lot of slides to demonstrate this thing to you, but probably just in your gut, you understand that taking plants from wet areas and putting them in dry areas does not work very well. And you would be correct. People have talked about moving plants as the climate is changing for assisted migration, for example, but nobody talks about moving from wetter to drier. People have talked about moving things from the south north as our climate dries, but this is the absolute opposite of how anyone would recommend moving plants. So this is a little crazy. And myself and my lab members, some of whom are pictured here, have been spending the last almost 20 years trying to make this go better, right? It's not really working, but how can we make it go better? And one of the things that we're fighting is assumptions about how the world works and assumptions about how plants grow, both our assumptions and other people's assumptions. One of those assumptions is that larger plants are always more competitive than smaller plants. This is the world we live in. And if you take a class and you learn about disturbance and recovery from disturbance, after disturbance, there's this idea that you get really small species in there, they colonize the site, they're eventually overtopped by shrubs and small trees, and then eventually the site is covered with these dang trees again. And that is the way the world works. It's a progression from smaller plants to bigger plants. Bigger is more competitive over time. This is what we want. And I'll just ask you, as a desert person, do these plants look like they're trying to overtop each other or kick each other out? I see a lot of space. I don't see a lot of fighting for light. I don't see a lot of big plants, frankly. I see a lot of small plants. But we're still stuck with this assumption that bigger is always better. And I had this epiphany. The reason why this is it's because of where I was educated. It's because where we were all educated. The universities of the world are located in very productive environments. We do not put universities in deserts. We actively avoid that. There's no research university between us and Salt Lake City, right? There's a huge area where nobody's looking at plants. And so if all the universities observe this, that is where our theory comes from, right? That bigger is always better. And it really is affecting Nevada. It's affecting us, and it's affecting, dare I say it, taxpayer dollars. Because you might be wondering, as I was, why are these the spots that we're picking? Why are these the cultivars that we're planting? Why does this particular spot get to be, the thing that we put all over Nevada? And I had the wonderful graduate student, Owen Boffman, who is the most patient man in the universe, and he combed through 90 releases of different cultivars that you can buy in the Great Basin. And he simply tallied why that was picked, right? What's so special about this plant? And what he found was this. So if it's on the top, that means that people mention it a lot. We looked at grasses, forbs, and shrubs. The number one thing was large size and forage quality. That is what we want, right? We want a huge seed yield. We want seedling vigor, which means very large, vigorous seedlings. This establishment and persistence, that's actually in the agricultural field, not the Tonopah part of the field. So this is, can grow well for a farmer. It's not till you get down here towards the bottom where you get things like very competitive with exotic annuals, or highly genetically diverse, or good at dealing with salt. So these sort of ideas about how the world works have leaked into the cultivars that we're using in the Great Basin. And the plants in the north are typically larger than the plants in the south. They get more water and they produce more biomass. And that is why we're putting them in Nevada. So it's super easy to make fun of other people's worldviews. It's much harder to say what you should do instead, right? And so that is what my lab has been trying to say. We probably think that's crazy, but what is our alternative? So we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out what actually does help our native plants survive in these dry, invaded places. And the cool thing is Nevada is surrounded by areas like this. This is right outside Collin Ranch, which are disturbed. This is caught on fire, 3 times since I've lived here. And there is cheatgrass around here. That's what this lower plant is. But there are still native species growing in this disturbed environment. There are not as many as there were 50 years ago, but there are still some plants out here. And when I first moved here and saw this and saw these native plants coexisting with these weeds, I started wondering why and how we're still looking at some of these plants. Are they here because they're just sort of the last ancestors and they're all going to die and it's just, a matter of time and chance before these things are all dead too? Or does this group of plants represent some subset of our native diversity that has actually figured out how to grow with cheatgrass, right? Are these sort of a special 1%, if you will, of the plants that are out there? And are they evolving, as we know plants can do, to their environment? Are they figuring this out? That is a very hopeful question for me, because it means that, humans don't have to fix this necessarily, that plants over time can evolve to deal with this new invader, maybe, if this is not just a random bunch of plants. And so we thought about how to answer that question, and we can't go back in time. I can't go back 100 years and see what was there and compare it to what's there now. That would be ideal. But what we realized we could do was find these spots around Nevada where wildfires had burned through and then been stopped. This was stopped by a fire line and some fire retardant. This is an Elko, actually. And this side of this mountain, you can view this as one whole population. This side has been invaded by cheatgrass, and this side has still got its shrub overstory. And we realized that we could go find native plants in the invaded area and compare them with plants in the native area and ask if their characteristics had changed. And if they had, it would tell us what are the things that help you grow in this invaded site, right? So this is how you go back in time when you can't go back in time. You go back in space. So we found a bunch of spots in Nevada where fires had happened. Often they stop at roads, so you could find an invaded side of the road like this and then cross the road and find a less invaded area. We found all of these little grasses. We dug them up when they were dormant, which is actually a really effective way to get a bunch of plants. We brought them back to the greenhouse, stuck them in the ground. One of my colleagues, he was kind of mean. He was like, "Why is Beth planting broomsticks?" And I was like, "Oh, shut up, dude. These are native plants. I understand they don't look very good at the moment, but they do grow. Even when they're dormant, you can rip them in half, which is what we did. So we took one half and we grew it by itself in a pot, and then we took another half and we added a whole bunch of cheatgrass. So we tortured half of it, and we asked how well these plants were able to deal with it. And we specifically asked if those plants that had been invaded for some time were better at tolerating this competitor than the plants from the naive side of the road. So we harvested the cheatgrass out after a growing season. This is actually a plant that did really well. It preferred to be alone, but it also was able to grow some leaves when cheatgrass was around. And we asked that question, how many times were the plants in the invaded areas more tolerant of cheatgrass competition? And I'm going to spare you that graph and just tell you that in 3 out of the 5 spots, those plants were actually better at dealing with cheatgrass, which is super cool. Evolution is not perfect. Every site is not primed for adaptive evolution, but some of our sites did have evidence that plants were evolving. One of the cool things, when I put these broomsticks in the ground and added water, they started greening up instantly. This was the best thing they'd ever seen. And we very quickly realized that there was a difference in how fast the invaded and uninvaded grasses were greening up. So this is 10 days after I added water. 80% of the invaded plants were green, and only less than 40% of the more naive plants. They were taking their time. They didn't know about cheatgrass. Cheatgrass means get up, grab the water, right? Because it's coming. And these guys are taking their time. So this is evidence of an evolutionary shift in our natives to be more competitive with cheatgrass. The other super cool thing is that those plants were also better at suppressing cheatgrass. You have to deal with them, but you also are trying to push it down. And that is what this graph shows. So this is a graph of cheatgrass on this axis. If you're up here, it means there's a lot of cheatgrass. If you're down here, it means there's not a lot. This is where we want to be, because we want to keep that plant out. Each one of these individual bars is a particular plant that we collected either from an invaded area in red or an uninvaded area in blue. So what you can see is these naive plants are not doing a good job at keeping out weeds. They're letting a whole lot of cheatgrass grow. But these plants that we collected from the middle of cheatgrass are actually doing a great job keeping it down, which is so gratifying, right? They can figure it out. They are figuring it out. And if you look in here, you can see the blue bars down here. That is the raw material for natural selection to act. Wild populations, uninvaded areas, have some that are good at keeping out cheatgrass and some that are bad. And when we get an invasion, we push out all the ones who can't, and we increase the genotypes of the ones that can. And this is awesome, because again, it means that we don't have to fix everything, right? These plants can evolve rapidly. Thank God. The other really weird thing that I still can't explain is these red bars, these plants that are doing a good job at keeping out cheatgrass, they're actually smaller. They're smaller plants. We published this. We didn't understand it, so we didn't talk about it. We just kind of buried it. But over time, the uninvaded plants kept getting bigger, and these invaded ones stayed small, and yet they also kept the cheatgrass small. That is not how we understand plant competition to work. I have some ideas about what might be happening, but at this point in time, I still haven't tested them, and this is just sort of a big head scratcher. Why would a small plant be better at keeping out a weed? I don't know, but it was my first hint that we might not want giant plants in the Great Basin. We might want these small plants. The second experiment that beat me over the head about how small is better than big was realizing that when we're putting these millions of pounds of seed in the ground, We can also use that as an experiment. So we know, like we literally put, tons and tons of seeds in the ground. We consider ourselves lucky if 1% of them turns into a plant. And so it is basically that same kind of question that we asked in the natural systems. Is that 1% just random? Is it just like, they managed to be under a rock, or they're in the shade, or they got just the right spot? Or is that 1% that is surviving because it has particular characteristics that we can measure and try to understand? So we did this experiment in Elko, again, my favorite test area. This is a fire that was seeded by the Forest Service, and they actually did a spectacular job. So this isn't really a fair photo. They do not all look like this. But we went to one of these fires that were seeded, not this one, and we collected seeds from the plants that actually managed to survive. And we asked that question specifically: is establishment random, or do they survive for some particular reason? And the way that we did that was my wonderful former master's student, Sarah Kolpa. She charmed the Forest Service into saving her bags of seed from the day that they were seeding, so we know what went in the ground. Then she went back out to the fire site 2 years later and collected seeds from that 1% of the plants that actually were able to persist. She collected a bunch of plants, but only one of them ended up making seeds at this site. Can you guess which one it is? You have all the information needed. Do you remember the stars? Do you remember the one star in Nevada? That is what Sarah worked on, because that is the one plant in Nevada that made seeds. Squirrel tail, my favorite grass, because it shows up. So that cultivar, it has the worst name in the world. It's called Toe Jam Creek, which I'm just like, oh, God. Not only do we only have one from Nevada, this is its name. It's so bad. So Sarah collected seeds from 100 plants that had survived at 2 different fire sites, and she did that work to compare that sample of survivors with the original seeds. She grew them out at UNR. She built this amazing bird exclosure and this watering system, and cleared the ground and made a fence. Sarah never does anything halfway. That's the thing about Sarah. And she planted everybody on toothpicks. We always do this thing where we glue our seeds to toothpicks so we can track our grass, because you cannot believe how much grass comes up in the world, right? And how are we going to know that it's our grass? So the way that we do it is we glue it to a toothpick, and when it comes up along that toothpick, that is our plant. So that's how we know. So she did this. She grew a bunch of seeds from that original collection. She grew a bunch of seeds from the 1%. I'm not going to show you that graph either. I'm just going to tell you what she found. She found, we were still surprised, that the smaller plants had the best survival in the field. And those smaller plants came from smaller seeds. Those plants that survived also made seeds earlier, and they germinated and came up earlier, which was, again, super shocking to us at that time. But when you think about it, it's better in the desert to not grow more leaves than you can support. And these smaller, more conservative strategies is how you don't die, right? It doesn't matter if you can grow 12 leaves if you can't support that biomass. That's smarter to make, a few leaves and support it. It's better to be small than dead. That's my motto. And that seems to be the thing that works. If you dig around in the literature, you can find other people realizing that small size can be beneficial. There are some studies of wild plants that show that in these drought events in particular, you'll have everybody will die except for the very smallest seedlings, which is cool. We also know in parts of the world where water is limiting, we grow dwarf varieties of crops. We have sunflowers that are about knee high, right? They don't have to be 8 feet tall. We also have dwarf wheat varieties. So there are parts of us, parts of our knowledge, we do know that small can be good, but it often gets buried based on this sort of dominant thinking. Okay, the third piece of evidence that small is awesome comes from museum specimens, which again, I am the director of the Museum of Natural History. I have a real soft spot for museums and what you can learn from collections. And I read this super cool paper called Shrinking Body Size as an Ecological Response to Climate Change. And this was done by a group of researchers looking at changes in body size in museum specimens over time. And they asked how often plants fish, ectotherms, birds, and mammals were getting bigger, getting smaller, or not changing at all. And they found evidence that a lot of these species are actually getting smaller over time. As the climate warms, their body size shrinks. At the time this paper was published, there had only been 2 plants studied in this way, which I was like, well, I know how to fix that, right? Let's look at some more. So myself and my lab got together and we picked 6 different beautiful little annual forbs of the Great Basin that we have in our wonderful plant collection at UNR. So people have been collecting there since the 1850s, and they have been collecting these little beautiful annuals along with many other things. The collectors go out, they press them, they put them on these sheets, they put information on this label that lets us know where they were and when they collected it. And we, as scientists, are able to go in there and measure how big these plants are, and then do that work and ask if they're changing over time. I'm finally starting to clue in, right, that like maybe small is the new big. So of these 7 species that we picked, we found that 5 of them actually are getting smaller. One didn't care about climate change, which is cool. And then one of them loves it and is absolutely going gangbusters and getting larger. This is Manzelia albicollis, which loves disturbance, comes up after fire. It has a distribution that goes into Mexico and Baja and possibly came up more recently than some of these other species. And it's doing great, right? And so I love it when I'm both right, that yes, small is the new big, but there's also exceptions to the rule. And this is how science keeps moving forward. It's like you find what you expect, and then there's always a surprise, right? And I just love it. Okay, so you remember that first list of the characters that we're using to put stars all over Nevada and buy millions of pounds of seeds? This is what we've come up with after 20 years of making our own list. We think that picking smaller plants, both adults and seedlings, things that green up really early when you add water, things that flower early, things that germinate early, particular root characteristics, and generally spending a lot of your energy underground. These things are what helps plants grow in the Great Basin, and these are the plants that we should be planting. I'm going to pop into roots here now. I absolutely love looking at plant roots. It's the coolest thing that we never get to see when we're just walking around. So even cheatgrass has cool roots, I will tell you that. So cheatgrass is very, very common, and this particular individual, I can't find this paper again, and I can't figure out where this came from. And yes, I tried the Google reverse image search, but this person, whose name I can't remember, dug a soil pit under a cheatgrass monoculture, and they dug down 1 meter, and the roots of cheatgrass were still there, which is what we're looking at, and then they finally just stopped digging. They were like, I'm done. I can't go beyond 1 meter. And that is the deal in the desert. The resources that are being, fought over, it's not light. Everybody has enough light. We all wear hats and sunscreen because we are not light limited. The resources that are limited in the desert are below ground, and this is where our most successful plants have learned to put a lot of their energy. You can go really far down this rabbit hole of plant roots if you want to. This is absolutely magnificent project, which I'll show you on the next slide. This is a convolvulus from China and East Asia, and this is how big it is above ground, and it's going down almost 3 meters underground, these roots. This is why you can't kill bindweed in your yard, by the way. By pulling it out, does like nothing, right? These roots are robust, and what you see on the surface is just a very small part of this plant. Here is an astragalus. This is also almost 3 meters deep. These root excavations were the life's work of these 2 fine people, Lori and Erwin, who are Austrian botanists and agriculturalists. They're no longer with us, unfortunately, but they spent their life excavating roots and drawing root systems. And yes, you should 100% take a picture of this URL because it's hard to find, but there's over 1,000 drawings of roots, and every one is more surprising than the last. They're so cool. You can also Google the Kuchera root project will get you this, but it's absolutely spectacular. And I just picked out a couple, but there's wetland plants and there's plants. It's outrageous. It's cool. I'm lucky in that I don't have to dig 3 meters down to learn something about my plants. We learned very early on that what a grass seedling chooses to do in the first 10 days of its life can tell us a ton of information about whether it's going to live or die. So we're not digging giant pits. We plant things in tubes that are 6, 7 inches deep, and then we watch until they emerge. We let them grow for 10 days. Then I pay this army of undergraduates to wash soil from roots, and then they scan them, and we can learn all kinds of information from them. We can see how large their leaf area is, we can get their total root length, we can get how wide the roots are, we can count the number of these little root tips on there, all these different characters that we can find out very quickly from these plants. And I'm going to show you how we used this to understand squirrel tail, my favorite grass, establishment. So we did this drive around the Great Basin, and we collected seeds from 35 different populations of this plant. It's very widespread, which is one of the reasons why I love it, and kind of easy to find. We did this work to describe those seed characteristics, the seed and seedling characteristics of 10-day-old plants. We weighed each seed. My undergraduates, paid by the hour at least, weighed bazillions of seeds. They noted how long it takes them to emerge out of the soil. We measured all these characteristics, root, shoot, total size. We were kind of seed limited for this project, so we only took 20 seeds for each population and used that to characterize the entire wild population, which felt very radical and risky and it wasn't going to work. I'll just tell you that. But it was all we could spare. The coolest thing about nature is how much variation there is out there. So each of these dots is one of those 35 populations. This is just a couple of the things we measured. So this is how long their roots are at 10 days, and then this is how wide they are. So wider up here and more narrow. And what you can see is this absolute palette, if you will, of opportunity. There's long, medium-sized roots, there's short, fat roots, and everything in between. So if you're a restoration practitioner and you're trying to find a seed that could, live in cheatgrass, you have a lot of variability to work with. If you are natural selection and you're trying to, make your, they're not, I'm anthropomorphizing, and natural selection is acting on these populations, there's so much variability out there. So this is the raw stuff that keeps our plants on the ground. So this is cool. So we took all these plants that we now understand something about them, and we put them out in the field at these little blue dots, these really dry, terrible, cheatgrass invaded nightmare sites that still have beautiful sky. I have to say, Nevada skies never disappoint. And we do it typically this time of year. We're usually planting in October, November. We're trying to get things in the ground before the first rain. But it's ridiculously dry out there, and these poor dudes are pounding these seeds into the ground. We finally innovated this new method. Of getting our seeds into the ground. So not only are we gluing them, but we're drilling. Anyway, yeah, you do what you have to do. And so when they come up, we're able to tag them like this. We use paper clips, and we know our grass from all the grass around it. So we did that. We planted, plants from 35 places, 35 different collections. We planted them on the ground in 5 separate invaded sites. And we simply asked this question: do those 35 populations that we know differ in a bunch of stuff, do they also differ in survival? And the answer was yes. So this is the percent of plants that were actively growing in June. I've learned you don't measure size. Size doesn't matter. It matters if you are alive or dead, right? So this is, are you there in June? And the lowest are, less than 1%, and the best are 6, 7%. You might recognize this name here. Peavine is doing pretty well, right? There's a lot of variability, but there's also a lot of hope there on this side of the graph. So if you're a restoration practitioner and you're faced with all the variability in the world and you want to grow things from seed in cheatgrass invaded environments, these are the populations that you want to be picking because they survive, 7 times as well as the worst places. Because we're scientists, we also want to know why, right? And so not just who, but why. And this next graph was up until this year, this was my favorite graph that I've ever made. I'm going to also show you my new favorite graph here in a minute, but this is my second favorite graph. And you might see why. So that average 10-day root length of 20 seeds, representing an entire population, predicts your survival. This is averaged across 5 sites. This means that 50% of the variation in survival is explained by how long your roots are at 10 days in a greenhouse, from 20 seeds. Like, that is money, like literally money, right? This is how you pick the plants to put out in these invaded spots, as you measure their roots. We can add a couple more things. If we put the seed weight in there and how long it took them to emerge, we can get 66% prediction of whether you're going to live or die based on just these 3 things, which is so cool. And so I felt really good about myself for quite a while here with this. I will tell you, there's another story. This story goes off on another tangent called How Well Do These Plants Play with Others? And that is a very fascinating story that I don't have time to tell you, but I'll just tell you that, my favorite graph became a little bit of a uh-oh, because these are kind of competitive plants, right? So you got to, but we did learn, okay? We did learn what helps a plant grow. It's called roots, people. So there is a lot to learn about the world's deserts, and we are not done. Every time we find something new or surprising, it's just another road that we get to go down. We just keep branching and learning. A lot of what we do looks like this. We dig a lot of holes. This is a somewhat controlled environment, so we've kind of cleared out vegetation and we're putting plants in the ground. We're going to see how they do. This works sometimes. Other times, we like to do more natural experiments where we'll seed out. This is like a post-fire seeding. For my students, especially my master's students, I have them do a lot of greenhouse work because the desert can be very unforgiving. Master's students have to think of a project, carry out a project, analyze a project, and write it up in like 2.5 years, right? And so they don't have time for dry years. So almost all of my master's students will do some kind of greenhouse project, which is also super fun. So this is a greenhouse project. We're going back to the salt desert, the lowest of the low and the driest of the dry. We've started working with those plants. My wonderful student, Kathy Silliman, worked with these in the greenhouse, but she also was brave enough to put them out in the field. So we had the insurance policy called this huge experiment we did in the greenhouse, so Kathy can get her degree. But then we also did this more risky thing by putting plants out in the field. And this is Kathy's species of choice. It's called winter fat. It's really delicious and nutritious, as you might guess from that name. The Latin name is absolutely, it's named after Krashenenikov, right, Jerry? Do you remember? Yes, Russian botanist. There's several of these in the world, and we just happened to get one of them, unfortunately. We made our students learn this plant, and we made them spell it correctly. So they hated us. But it is a wonderful plant. This is not its fault. I prefer to call it winter fat, right? It's a wonderful plant. And so Kathy was testing that idea that some people have thrown out there, that we should go to the south, we should go to southern Nevada, and we should get those drought-adapted plants, and we should bring them up to northern Nevada, where they're 100% going to do better than our local plants, right? Because they know about hot and dry, and our local plants have evolved in more cooler and wetter conditions, and as the climate changes, we're going to want those southern plants. So we're hearing a lot of this from managers. So Kathy decided to test it in the field. So she grew these adorable little babies in the greenhouse here and transplanted them out to 2 different field sites, one near Gerlach and one in southeastern Oregon. And for a while, the southern plants were doing great. Everybody was doing great. Everybody was surviving at about 45%, which just seemed good. The southern plants were even getting a little bit bigger, which we all now know doesn't matter. But we were looking at this and we were like, well, maybe this idea is not crazy. Maybe it's a great idea to bring southern plants north. And then these guys showed up. So the Mormon cricket, which, yes, we are familiar with this insect, it is an enormous, enormous grasshopper, and this is the distribution of it. Notice how it does not occur in southern Nevada, right? This is a northern Nevada and more eastern phenomena. These things, if you haven't met them, they can have these absolutely insane outbreaks. They march through the vegetation and they just eat absolutely everything. They eat each other. They seemed to me, as a botanist, to be just like very stupid lawnmowers, just going through and eating like anything, sticks, rocks, anything. But Kathy called me from the field and she was like, oh my God, there's huge bugs eating my plants. And I was like, that's okay. We have insurance, remember? Just write it down. Just write down who's being eaten, and come back. And so she did, and found this incredible thing, that they're not big, dumb lawnmowers. This is the percent of plants out there that are getting eaten by these Mormon crickets. And this is the plants from the south, and these are the plants from the north. And oh my God, those crickets are picking out those southern Nevadan plants, and they're eating them to a really high degree. And they're not eating these more northern, these big, dumb lawnmowers seem to be able to tell where these plants came from. So this ended up making them, this is my favorite graph, you guys, the most spectacular example of why local plants really do know what they're doing. This herbivory event just crashed these southern populations, and the survival ended up being, super, super low. And these local plants that got less herbivory, they're still fine. They're surviving at like 40%. And then the cool thing is the sort of intermediate ones were absolutely intermediate. So whatever characteristic these insects are cluing in on, it has this sort of north-south gradient. And I was just like, okay, I'm done. You should only ever plant local plants. We don't know why. We have no idea why, right? But these plants, do you remember where we started? These plants know what they're doing. We show up, we think we know what we're doing. We get out of the car, we're there for a few minutes, we mess with them. If they don't know what they're doing, they're not here, right? And we just, I think, need to approach these desert plants with some humility and ask the question, how is it that you're persisting over time? And how can I learn from you? Because obviously, my ideas are incorrect a lot of the time, which is the best part of science, is the learning. So what are we doing about this? You may have already been thinking about this. Nevada absolutely has plants here, right? We have a lot of plants. And so a bunch of us are working to collect Nevada's smaller plants and get those into agricultural production. Yes, it takes longer to make seeds from smaller plants, but it is possible. So these are some BLM collaborators from the Winnemucca district. They collected seeds on their district, and we grew them up, and then we planted them back out into the field. The Nevada Native Seed Partnership is taking this on. It's a huge group of state, federal, nonprofit, university folks, all led by my very first master's student, Sarah Kolpa. So come full circle, 20 years later, she is absolutely running the show, and she's in charge of all of us. She created this partnership, and she brought in federal funding, and we're doing the work to collect the seeds and grow them and get them out in Nevada, which is wonderful. We also started a seed cleaning facility. That became one of the bottlenecks, is we didn't have anywhere to clean those seeds when we picked them out from the wild. So at UNR, we now have this new seed cleaning facility. It's like, that's the Nevada way. You don't have it, and then you make it, and you do have it, right? So if you want to explore more about Nevada's native plants, which I think you should join the Nevada Native Plant Society. And so our president, Emma Wynn, is here. She brought cards, you guys. The Nevada Native Plant Society just had its 50th birthday. It's a wonderful group of people. They lead field trips around here. This is, I think, Arrow Creek, yes? I mean, you don't need to drive hours and hours. This is not like hardcore hiking. I put this quote down here, right? If you want to go very slow and also not very far, go with botanists, right? That's sort of their motto. So these are really fun trips for people of all abilities and ages. So I would 100% recommend that you corner Emma in the flowered shirt. And then another really fun thing is the iNaturalist app. If you have this on your phone already, you know how fun it is. There's a new version. So there's a classic version, and then there's a new version. And I would highly recommend getting the new version, because that turns your camera into a live identifier. You basically just point it at any plant or animal, and it gives you within like 85 to 90% accuracy what you're looking at. So this is a way that you too can go to the Fernley Wildlife Management Area and get off the road and actually have a clue what you're looking at, right? Instead of just wandering around. So I would highly recommend these two resources. I will thank my funders and my wonderful lab mates, my wonderful army of undergraduates, many who have gone on to careers in plants after getting tired of gluing things on toothpicks. And I will thank all of you for giving me your time this evening and for listening. Thank you.
And we have some microphones to capture any questions that you have for Beth. So you went over
Or Emma
here.
or Jerry.
That was wonderful, Beth. Thank you.
Yay.
So in the experiment, so bringing the plants down from the south, it wasn't
Yes.
clear to me, were they the same species of
Yes.
plant?
Yes. It was the
Okay.
same species of winter fat from, southern Nevada, brought up to Gerlach.
So as a follow-on then, the northern plants are more resistant to herbivory.
Yeah.
Is anybody looking at the plant's secondary metabolites to see if they're like more bitter compounds?
Nope.
Or that kind
Do you want to do that?
Hell yeah.
I just talked at UC Davis a few weeks ago, and Rick Carbon is a professor there who does plant-insect interactions, and he loves a crazy story, and he's retired now, and he has a lot of time, and he, I think, wants to do some insect taste test trials. He has a theory that it could be something like that. He also thinks it could be novelty, that insects are like us, they like new things. And so it might be that they've been mowing down all the local plants, and then the southern Nevada ones are there, and it's just something new. But I told him, I was like, well, they're cluing in on something. Somehow they know it's new, right? There's some cue. So I have no idea what it is. And they look exactly the same to me.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Can you tell me where cheatgrass originated from? I read that it came from Europe and to feed the cattle, and then it exploded, but I don't know if it's...
Yeah, the question is where cheatgrass came from, and what you heard is correct. So it came from Europe to North America. It also came from Eurasia to North America somehow. We've done cheatgrass genetics, if you can believe it, and there are multiple routes of introduction. The main one is Europe to North America. The cool thing is that cheatgrass, which has now been here for, 150 years, it's also showing really strong signs of local adaptation. And I know, right? So even these weeds, they come swirling in across the world, and then they take over the landscape, and then even they can't fight it. They start becoming locally adapted to the place where they came from. So maybe we'll have some varieties of cheatgrass in the future that we don't have now. But yeah, you're right. It was us, it's humans, our hay, our animals. It loves us, and it follows. Anyone who's ever hiked in it, it's in your socks. It loves humans. Yeah.
Data for fine fuel reduction, because Arrow Creek Open Space, one of my favorite places to go in the few years I've been here, they put sheep in, and they put sheep in May, and they keep them in for a month, and those sheep don't want to eat cheatgrass, particularly in some years that cheatgrass is already pretty dried up. They much prefer the native material. And so it's not in the least bit quantitative, but qualitative observations showing cheatgrass is actually spreading and increasing in that area. And you chat to the people, and they say, oh, yes, there are some papers somewhere that says this will... Is the research being done to find out?
Yes. We put in fences in Thomas Creek.
Yeah, I noticed some.
Yes, so those are grazing exclosures. So we will be able to gather the data about what these animals are doing and how they're changing the landscape. It's interesting, we had a bunch of Chinese scientists come to the United States. That's one of the places where cheatgrass is from. And it was designed to ask about this cheatgrass question. Why is cheatgrass invasive in Nevada and it's not invasive in China? And they came here and they were like, oh, you have too many plants. You need to just graze this to the ground, right? And then when we went to China, yes, it looked like this floor, right? There were no plants. And so that is a super effective way of getting rid of cheatgrass. But you have to get rid of every plant, right? You have to mow it down. And so there's some kind of happy medium here. We can't have cement. That's not better, But the grazing, I think, has to be timed and directed appropriately and using the right animals. But you're right, our native plants are so delicious. They would obviously rather eat clover than cheatgrass, right?
Oh yes, particularly the trifolium macrocephalum there that is gorgeous, and there's fabulous lomation and all sorts down there.
Yeah,
much nicer.
But we did put some fences in, so we
great.
can answer this. Yeah.
But what happens, even if they graze it down, the picture of the roots are like this, isn't it just going to come?
So cheatgrass is an annual. So that's the one thing. Yes, it has to reseed every year. So that is its one Achilles heel. And it loves litter. It loves plant litter. And if it's a bare area, it will not establish very well. It needs a little bit of a blanket. So if you can disrupt that litter layer by doing grazing that is pretty intense, briefly, and not very often, I would say, you might be able to interrupt that germination and growth. But doing a little bit of grazing sometimes is not gonna do much, in my opinion. Yeah. But great point, yeah.
Where's a good place for people to find locally sourced plants and seeds?
What a great question. So the Nevada Division of Forestry has a nursery, the Washoe Valley Nursery, I think it's called, and it's now, for the first time, open to anyone. It used to only be open for people who had large properties, but now anyone can go there, and it's wonderful. It's in Washoe Valley, so it's Nevada Division of Forestry Nursery. That's the best place I know. The Native Plant Society, you have to know a guy, right? You can get plants from these fine people, but they're sort of swapped informally. So you could join the Nevada Native Plant Society and certainly find yourself with some nice native plants. But they're for sale at that nursery, and they do a great job. Any other points, Emma? Yeah.
Nevada Extension, along with the butterflies and bugs and Native Plant Society, we tried to put together a list of some of the nurseries.
Okay. Yes.
Find it on the resource page of our website and the Nevada Extension.
Okay, yes. So there is.
Nevada Extension.
Okay, yes, Nevada Cooperative Extension and the Native Plant Society have a list of places where you can buy native plants on their website. Yes.
There's a list of all the nurseries that we know of in Nevada.
Yay.
Source native plants.
Great.
And if you know of ones that aren't on there, my contact, you can email me. I owe you.
Yay. Great. Yay. Yes, and gardening in your home is a great way to support local native plants and insects. They always find them. All the native plants in my yard get found by native bees instantly. It's a really actually impactful thing to do. Yeah.
Do you think in areas where cheatgrass has totally taken over, that something like a controlled burn or removing it totally and then starting over by planting more native species would be an effective method of management, or would the cheatgrass ultimately just take over again?
So my observation is cheatgrass does not do very well the first year after a fire because that litter is gone. And so you can feel like, oh my God, this is amazing. And then when you come back the next year, there's a little bit more. And then that third year, there's a lot more. So I think a combination of nobody will let you do a controlled burn in Nevada, but if there was a natural burn, getting in there and aggressively getting the right plants established would be your best bet. There are some herbicides that are being tested for use. They're pre-emergent, so they stop seed emergence. And the idea is you can stop the annuals and then the perennials will still be fine and they'll come back. And we've tried this. The problem is cheatgrass seed bank is so dense. There's something like 40,000 seeds per square meter. So even if you miss one or two, those few plants get so big, it's almost like you didn't spray it, So it's really, really hard to use herbicides effectively when your seed bank is that dense. It's really, really hard to use fire when it comes back so quickly. I will tell you, having observed natural recovery, if you leave it alone, it will go back to perennial plants in about 70 years. which is like longer than we want to wait. But the reality is plants in the desert are perennial for a reason. That's the best strategy over the long haul. The reason why cheatgrass is doing so well is because we are lighting it on fire and disturbing it and digging it up and all this stuff. If you just leave it alone, it will go back to perennial. That's life in the desert. Think saguaro, you know. Deserts are full of long-lived plants. We're the problem, you know. We need to stop lighting the I-80 corridor on fire, and then it will go back to perennial. So we kind of have to take the long view is where I go with this. It will eventually go away, but it's going to take a while. We're probably going to have to go away first. Yeah.
I have a question. So you had mentioned seed washing.
Mm-hmm.
And so the first question in my mind was like, well, how do you wash seeds without sprouting them? So can you just explain the process of what seed washing is?
That's a great question. Seed cleaning. And we should come up with a better term for that, because really it's a dry process. I always joke, it's like a very fancy way of going like this and like this. So it's like a bunch of different equipment that basically does that, but just like at scale. So it's not wet. It's rubbing and then blowing or shaking or sieving or something like that. Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, we need to stop calling it cleaning. What should we call it? Sorting. I don't know. Yeah.
Okay. My question is about your experiment that you did with the different sizes of the blue-eyed Mary, the Microsterus, the Menzelia.
Yes.
All of those. So I'm just wondering, you said that they're getting smaller over time, but how much of that difference in size is related to precipitation or lack of precipitation, and how did you rule that out?
Yeah, we don't know, and so it could be either. It could be a genetic shift, or we call it a plastic shift, right? That's just called, you don't get a lot of water and then you get smaller. Those kinds of shifts often over evolutionary time get fixed. There'll be like a mutation that, you know, just sort of gets that stuck. So over time, plasticity leads to local adaptation is what is thought, but it can take a long time. So yeah, we don't know if it's a genetic shift or a plastic shift, but either way, trending small. Yeah, yeah, great question. Yeah, you guys are good. It's like late. How is your brain working this well? Yeah.
I think we have time for just one more question.
Hi. You had presented us evidence that suggested disturbed plants seem to be more resilient.
Yes.
So I was wondering, has there been any work to investigate if there's a way to cultivate more resilient or evolved native seeds?
Yeah, that is a great question. And it has kind of changed the way we do seed collecting. People used to go to the pristine side of the road, right, and collect all of the stuff that hasn't been disturbed, because that's what we're trying to get back. But when we've started realizing the value of places like Peavine, places that have this constant disturbance, the collection crews have started focusing on environments that have this mix of native and cheatgrass, with that hope that they actually have some of these characteristics already that we need. So yeah, that's an awesome question and a great observation. The only problem is when we do the seed cleaning, we end up with like cheatgrass in those seeds, and so it can be challenging. But we have some machinery that can sort of separate the different kinds of seeds, which is half the work too. Yeah, and undergrads picking it out. Yeah. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And please join me in thanking Beth for a wonderful presentation.
Great. Thank you so much.